Hello and welcome, Exiles, to what happens when you combine a Jung build, the classic masturbator, with a Lance build, the man who seems to know only Ivory Tower. That's not true, by the way. If you check my YouTube, I've posted like 15 builds, and out of the 15 builds I've posted most recently, 2 of them have had the Balbala Ivory Tower Shaper's Touch setup, one of them being this character. I guess technically you maybe could count the Aura Stacker, but literally the only reason I was using Ivory Tower on that character was because I couldn't really afford a decent rare chest piece. I wanted to use a rare chest piece on that Aura Stacker build. It just wasn't in the price. It wasn't in the budget. Anywho, let's get into the basics of the character. So we're using this thing called Pyroclast of Sabotage. This is the main engine for flat damage we have in the build. The way it works is you put these mines next to an enemy. They have an aura that applies flat added fire damage with attacks and spells onto them. So for example, if I put down like 10 mines, I'm getting close to 3,000 flat added fire against those enemies due to these mines. I'm also combining that with a Stormblast mine, so I'm throwing down about 10 mines of Pyroclast and about 10 mines of basically 10-8, something like that. And these Stormblast mines also have an effect which is applying increased damage to enemies nearby. Now I have 150% aura effect from my mines, from my Saboteur Ascendancy, so that's about 80% increased damage taken. And I believe with about 10 mines, it's close to 3,000 flat added fire. So the idea is, how can we take advantage of those damage multipliers without feeling bad to play? Now, when it comes to these things, you want a skill that you don't have to interrupt attacking to throw down mines. So the thing I came away with, the things that could work are Blink Arrow Mirror or some sort of minion setup, something where the thing is attacking while you're doing whatever you're doing. Armor Brand Recaller, which is what we went with because it's something that you can kind of automate and just keeps going once you have it set up. You could also do something like a General's Cry build even. I think that could actually work really well because General's Cry is something you could have some level of automation on where you're not thinking about it. Anything that is like, hey, damage is being done regardless of whether or not I'm holding down my do damage button. Maybe you can combine it with totems, stuff like that could probably also be applicable. So the idea is, simply put, I went with the Armor Brand Recaller. I went with a Brand Recaller. It didn't necessarily have to be Armor Brand. That's just the one I ended up settling on. When I looked through the skills, Armor Brand looked to be like a pretty good option. And the funny thing about Armor Brand as one of the options I ended up with is I didn't even realize Jung had done this previously. And by the time I went through a whole list of Arcanist Brand skills I was thinking about doing that. I settled on Armor Brand. Funnily enough, Jung did this exact thing 2 months earlier. He did Armor Brand Recall with Pyroclast of Sabotage. Now, a few key differences. He didn't mix in Stormblast Mine. I think this is a mistake. I think if you look at the aura effect and how much you can get once you put on Minefield, the fact you can go to 18 mines, you hit capped out flat damage you can get from Pyroclast roughly around, I want to say 12 mines. And because of this fact, those extra 6 mines is basically free real estate. And I think adding in something like Stormblast Mine, 1 extra gem socket, and getting a damage multiplier on top of it is just better DPS. So I think that's an improvement from his raw setup he had there. And on top of that, I'm of course a strong believer in the power of Ivory Tower Wrath Pit. And there's a few reasons for this. Number 1 is it gets you a lot of base crit, a lot of base spell damage, a lot of ES. Things that are all very good for a build. The raw ES, raw EHP is something that's very good as a baseline. Once you add defensive layers on top of that, it starts to feel better and better and better. And then we also, well, to be quite frank, these uniques are quite powerful for quite cheap. Shaper's Touch, Ivory Tower, Cyclopean, Wrathpith, none of these are particularly expensive items, and it works really well when we're doing a 10D challenge and we're just trying to make it work. The other great advantage about doing something like an Ivory Tower setup is if you combine it with Blood Magic, that's just a big energy shield bonus. And on top of that, you also get the benefit of dealing with your mana cost much, much more easily because these things are based on a flat cost that you're reserving here. And life sustain is very easy to get. You can just click something like Eternal Youth, and all of a sudden you have a never-ending recharge for these skills to constantly be spending and reserving these mines without any real issue in the grand scheme of things in terms of cost. Blood Magic is one of those things that I think a lot of people sleep on, and it's very, very strong in combination with Ivory Tower because A, it solves your mana problems with basically 1 keystone, Eternal Youth plus Blood Magic, and you're there. You don't necessarily even have to go out to Blood Magic. You can get Blood Magic through something like a Malachi Simula, which, by the way, you can get with a decent corruption. It comes with lightning red strength, so it has some okay flat stats, not great. And then it has 20% double damage on it, which is actually a very powerful offensive stat. And there's not many items that are helmet slots that actually compete with that level of damage. So funny enough, a cheap little unique like this is actually quite good, and I even use this on my League Starter because it was very good in the League Starter as well. I should also mention, this is one other thing that even I forgot about when making this character. I went and did an Uber I was doing Uber testing, right? I started out with Uber Shaper, and I had forgotten that I can put an Eternal Blessing aura on for free. One thing you can do with Blood Magic is you can put on Eternal Blessing. Eternal Blessing says you can't have other aura skills on your mana reservation, which this means is for a life-based character, that's just one free reservation you just get 100% of the time if you grab this. So it works out pretty well in that instance. And I had forgotten about this for Uber Shaper, which basically was I was missing a Zealotry because I had Grace on and I didn't have Zealotry. Now I have Zealotry in the build. On top of that, you can also get the benefits of the larger EHP school or EHP scaling in general because Ivory Tower pairs well with the EHP scaling. So that's the basic building blocks of a Lance build. I love these items. I love this combination because it solves a lot of things. It gets you raw EHP, it gets you good percent damage scaling, it gets you your mana problem solved. It has a pretty complete package. There's a reason I showcase it a lot of times. And yeah, so basically we're combining a skill setup that Jung had done, Armor Brand Recaller, and we're adding in our go-to package of this just works and it works well, and we're going to see where it ends up. I will say the thing we're doing, by the way, trigger bots, Armor Brand Recall, what's special about it? Say I have one brand right here, and I trigger my Armor Brand Recall to occur. You will notice something very interesting. When it gets recalled, it's recalling twice. The way trigger bots work is everything that gets triggered on both trigger bots simultaneously, and what ends up happening is, even though I have one brand, every single time I get a recall, because I'm automating it, it's getting triggered on an automatic threshold. You can see it going off. 2 occurrences of the attack happen. Not only that, but the other interesting thing is it says 35% less damage with triggered spells. The one thing that's really good, and the reason Armor Brand or Brand Recaller is a thing in terms of a Saboteur, is because you remove the thing that's being actually dealing the damage from the thing that's getting triggered. You're triggering Brand Recall. That's the thing that would have the less damage applied to it. But the thing that's actually dealing damage does not take that less damage multiplier with it. So you just get full-on double DPS from having your brands being triggered via Brand Recall. Not only that, you can also do something interesting, which is add in another trigger source with the 8-second cooldown, the Benchcraft. It doesn't work if you have the Unveiled one, because something with the shared cooldown, this allows it to exist simultaneously. But you can have 2 different sources of trigger happening with a trigger socketed skill in your weapon if you have a Benchcrafter there. Originally, I was going to be doing a Darkseer with +2 all, and then I found out that the trigger allows for a second trigger source occurring. So what you'll notice here is, when I'm casting these skills, it's not just the trigger happening from the dudes, it's also a second trigger happening from the weapon I'm holding. So if you see here, there's 2 separate trigger sources. You see the cooldowns right here are going off. One is the regular automated trigger from automation, and the other is if I cast a skill, I get a trigger from here. And the other interesting thing about this is, I believe I'm not sure. I think it might double the amount of things triggered. When it's triggered through this, I think it does, it ends up being 4 instances of the one brand going off. I don't know if that makes sense, but something about triggering a trigger ends up being that way. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into the map and showcase how this character works. Our defensive layers are as follows. About 17,000 evasion with blind, ends up being pretty decent in terms of evasion. And then we have about 1,000 regen, which is okay. Technically, we could have got a little bit of leech if I had like a corruption with fire leech, or if I decided to add in a cluster, maybe drop some other damage nodes, we could have gone for that. We have onslaught on kill with Balbala Jewel, feels good. We have permanent uptime in these resistances, and as always, our big weak spot is right here, Chaos Res. I feel like these 10D challenges, it's just Chaos Res is expensive, and it just doesn't really fit in the budget. And for the most part, it doesn't matter until Sirus. Funnily enough, this character completely cleaned all the Ubers quite easily until I got to Sirus, and then I just chain died on ground degens. The one big bummer of playing Eternal Youth plus Ivory Tower, Blood Magic, that sort of setup, is when you stand on a ground degen, it turns off all sustain. And the stupid thing about that is it restarts your need for recharge. So for example, if you step on a ground degen on Sirus, you have another 4 seconds until your energy shield or life recharge at that point due to Eternal Youth would restart. Hence being, I'd stand on the ground degen, I wouldn't be able to use any of my skills like Frost Blink or Shield Charge to dodge or whatever. And that's how we ended up chain dying. Feels bad. It's just a problem when you run into the ground degens that turn off your sustain, such as Awaken or Sirus, and that's pretty much the only fight. Maybe that happens also in Exarch, but Exarch wasn't as much of a problem. Or I don't know if Exarch actually turns off the regen, so maybe it's fine for that. But anyways, regardless, let's go ahead and give you guys a showcase of what this character looks like when you're actually playing. For the most part, you can kind of just put down brands and just run around and have them trigger. You can also technically occasionally throw down mines when you need a bit more single target if you're having an issue on that front. Like say an enemy isn't dying, you run into like a Solier rare, like, okay, I guess that rare wasn't tanky, but the idea is the trigger bots will go around, they'll go stand next to the enemies, and as you trigger things, they will be just blowing up. And then if you get to like a larger pack, you could say, okay, let me put down my Stormblast mines, my Pyroclast mines, and then we'll have the extra flat added damage. Not something that you normally need too much. For the most part, it shouldn't be problematic. Now, I just realized, it's funny how apparent it is that filters are needed when you go into like a T16 map and stuff in comparison to an earlier map or whatever. A good example of this is right now I'm starting a project doing a hardcore SSF run where I basically turned off my filter because I need loot and I am taking whatever drops on the ground, versus now I'm doing a showcase. The filter is like, holy cow, there's way too much stuff on the ground, and it's a pretty apparent difference, so to speak. All right, anyways, let's go ahead and get into this Minotaur to show some of the single target. Brand recall, I have to say, having been the first time I've tried this out, is pretty dang neat. Let's see if this guy is... And that's what it looks like killing a Minotaur. As for 10D builds go, this is by far the highest damage we've had. I think by a decent amount. I don't know what DPS we're actually at. I have no real idea. I haven't really POB'd anything, but I'm pretty sure it's higher than most other things. From the Ubers I did, all of them were like cakewalk easy. The only one I had a hard time was with Sirus. I don't have Chaos Res, and he's the one guy that deals Chaos damage. And his ground degen, if I stand on it, disables my ability to use skills for about 4 seconds, which is a very big problem. One of the big dangers of doing Eternal Youth on a fight like Sirus. For most other fights, not a problem whatsoever, but on Sirus, it's a big problem. Anyways, this is the brand recolor. I named my character Jung, but better. That's mostly just a joke. I like Jung Roan. I just like to jab at him sometimes. It's a little bit fun. Anyways, this is the character. This is the idea of the brand recolor, but adding in the classic Lance items, as I've been told. Ivory Tower with Cyclopean, Shaper's Touch, Astromentus. These are just some go-to items that are very strong, very good combination. Can recommend if you haven't tried it out. It's a good time. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one.